On a crisp morning aboard a Skycrest Airlines flight, an incident unfolded that would set the stage for a controversy reaching far beyond a simple seating dispute. Darius Monroe, a distinguished CEO known for his groundbreaking work in technological innovation, settled into his pre-assigned first-class seat with the quiet confidence of a man who had spent decades upholding the law and his principles. Yet, as the cabin's ambient chatter and the gentle hum of the engines filled the air, an unexpected announcement shattered the calm. A stern-looking cabin crew member approached Darius with an air of authority that brooked no contradiction. In a measured tone that nonetheless carried an unmistakable edge, she informed him that his seat was not truly meant for him. Instead, the seat, she explained, was reserved for Felicia Anders, a white passenger who was described as a regular flyer, and someone who, according to established protocol, held preferential rights. The implication was as clear as it was infuriating. Here was a man who had earned every right to his place, being told that he simply did not belong. Taken aback by the unexpected directive, Darius maintained his composure. He calmly explained that his ticket clearly indicated his first-class status, and he produced his elite platinum membership card, an honor reserved for frequent travelers of his standing. Yet, the crew member, her expression unyielding, insisted that the seat was traditionally allocated to Felicia, whose presence, she argued, was non-negotiable. The entire exchange reverberated through the cabin, drawing the attention of nearby passengers whose murmurs soon escalated into a buzz of controversy. For Darius, this moment was not just a challenge to his seating rights but a pointed reminder of a deeply ingrained bias he had fought against throughout his career. The irony was palpable. A man who had built an empire dedicated to eliminating discrimination was now being subjected to it in the most mundane of settings. As he stood there, dignified, yet undeniably disturbed, he couldn't help but reflect on the cruel absurdity of the situation. The incident, brief as it was, resonated with everyone on board. Passengers exchanged glances and whispered their opinions, torn between protocol and the glaring injustice unfolding before them. Darius, aware that his every move was now being scrutinized, resolved to stand firm. In that charged moment, he silently vowed that his integrity and hard-won reputation would not be compromised by an arbitrary decision based on prejudice. Thus began a day that would soon become emblematic of the struggle between established biases and the modern quest for equality, a day when a simple seating assignment turned into a public confrontation that would ripple far beyond the confines of that single flight. After the initial commotion, the atmosphere in the Skycrest Airlines cabin remained charged with tension. Darius Monroe, still seated in his designated first-class spot, faced the persistent demands of the crew, who insisted that his presence was encroaching on a seat reserved for Felicia Anders. Determined to set the record straight, Darius calmly repeated his claim, presenting his elite platinum membership card as undeniable evidence of his entitlement to the seat. The card, embossed with the logo of his favorite travel alliance, gleamed in the overhead light, a silent testament to his years of loyalty and service. Despite his well-documented credentials, the cabin attendant remained unmoved. "This seat is traditionally meant for Felicia Anders," she declared in a tone that brooked no argument. For her, protocol and tradition were paramount, even if those traditions carried the weight of discrimination. As the exchange repeated itself, whispers of discontent and curiosity spread throughout the cabin. Other passengers leaned forward, trying to catch every word of this unexpected confrontation unfolding at 30,000 feet. In that moment, Darius felt a mixture of indignation and resolve. Here he was, a celebrated CEO and a man who had long fought against bias through his work, now having to defend his right to sit in a seat that had been arbitrarily reassigned based on outdated norms. His voice, measured and firm, cut through the mounting tension as he explained that the rules applied equally to every passenger, regardless of background. He reminded everyone that his ticket and membership card were evidence of his status, facts that should not be negated by personal prejudice. The crew member, however, clung to her justification. "It's not about your status, sir. It's about maintaining our regular seating order," she said, gesturing toward a roster of passengers whose names had been printed on a manifest. To her, Felicia Anders was not just any passenger, she was a regular whose place was sacred by long-standing custom. Yet to Darius, this justification smacked of an unjust system that valued appearances over merit. As the confrontation continued, a palpable shift occurred. Fellow travelers began to murmur in support of Darius, their expressions conveying disbelief at the apparent injustice. Some nodded subtly, acknowledging the irony that a man renowned for combating bias was being subjected to it. Others cast critical glances at the crew, questioning the integrity of a system that would allow such discriminatory practices to persist. Despite the pressure, Darius remained unflustered. His calm defiance, coupled with the indisputable evidence of his eligibility, slowly began to tilt the balance of opinion in his favor. He maintained that his presence in the seat was not only justified but emblematic of the progress that should define modern air travel, a sentiment that resonated with many on board. In that quiet yet determined stand, Darius Monroe reaffirmed his commitment to fairness, even as the seeds of a much larger battle were being sown in the hearts of everyone present. In the midst of the cabin's growing clamor, the true identity of Darius Monroe began to take center stage. Unbeknownst to many who witnessed the exchange, Darius was not only a frequent flyer with an impeccable record but also the visionary founder and CEO of Innovatech Solutions, a groundbreaking technology firm valued at over $2.8 billion. Innovatech Solutions specialized in developing advanced artificial intelligence systems specifically designed to eliminate bias in decision-making processes. The irony of this revelation was both striking and bitter. Here was a man who had built his career on the principles of equality and fairness, now having to defend his right to occupy a seat solely because of his appearance. As murmurs rippled through the cabin, passengers began to understand the magnitude of the situation. Darius had long been regarded as a pillar of progress in the corporate world, a trailblazer who had broken countless barriers for minority professionals. His accomplishments were well known in industry circles, and his reputation for integrity was beyond reproach. Yet, on this flight, his stature was being challenged by an outdated notion of entitlement that dictated seating based on race and tradition rather than merit. The cabin attendant's stubborn insistence that the seat belonged to Felicia Anders, a passenger whose name had become synonymous with routine and privilege, only amplified the contradiction. To those observing, it was as if the very principles of Innovatech Solutions were being defied by the archaic customs of the airline. Darius, though visibly perturbed, maintained a dignified silence. He knew that his calm, measured response was a powerful counterpoint to the baseless claims being thrust upon him. Drawing on decades of experience not just in business but in navigating the complexities of public service, Darius allowed his actions to speak for themselves. He stood quietly, holding aloft his platinum membership card as a symbol of his right to equality, both as a traveler and as a leader committed to eradicating bias. His resolve was a quiet rebuke to the ingrained prejudices that had somehow taken root in the seemingly benign world of air travel. As more passengers began to take notice, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted. Conversations broke out among those seated nearby, with many expressing support for Darius and questioning the validity of a rule that appeared to be rooted in discrimination. The irony was not lost on anyone. A man who had dedicated his life to creating technologies to combat bias was now facing it head-on in one of the most unexpected arenas. Even as Felicia Anders remained silent, her mere presence served as a reminder of the systemic inequities that still plagued everyday interactions. Darius's poised demeanor under such pressure resonated deeply with those around him. In that moment, his struggle transcended a mere seating dispute. It became a powerful symbol of the ongoing battle for equality in every facet of modern life. His quiet defiance was a call to action, challenging not only the policies of the airline but also the broader societal norms that allowed discrimination to persist. The tension in the cabin escalated as the dispute over the seating arrangement reached a fever pitch. What began as a seemingly minor inconvenience soon morphed into a public showdown, a microcosm of the broader struggle against institutional bias. As voices in the cabin rose and eyes fixed on the unfolding drama, Darius Monroe's calm resolve became a beacon for those who longed for fairness. In the midst of this charged atmosphere, the cabin attendant's argument began to crumble under the weight of rational scrutiny. She repeatedly insisted that the seat was traditionally reserved for Felicia Anders, a claim that, to the dismay of many, was supported not by any written regulation but by long-standing, unspoken customs. Darius listened patiently, his expression steady as he absorbed the absurdity of the rationale. He knew that this battle was not simply about a seat, it was about challenging an entrenched system that had, for far too long, allowed prejudice to masquerade as policy. As murmurs and side conversations rippled through the cabin, Darius took a decisive step. He requested that the attendant review the airline's manifest and the specific terms of his booking. With quiet determination, he cited his ticket details and membership status, emphasizing that his rights as a first-class passenger were unequivocally documented. The attendant's response was curt and dismissive, a verbal reminder that her adherence to tradition outweighed documented evidence in her eyes. The confrontation reached its zenith when, amidst the growing uproar, other passengers began to voice their opinions. A mixture of shock and support swirled around Darius as he maintained his ground with the dignified composure of a man who had weathered far worse storms in his career. Several passengers expressed admiration for his stance, while others quietly questioned the legitimacy of a rule that demanded segregation under the guise of tradition. In a moment that would be remembered long after the flight landed, Darius addressed the cabin directly. "I understand that protocols exist for a reason," he said, his voice both measured and resonant. "But I also believe that every individual has the right to be treated with respect and dignity, regardless of tradition." His words, simple yet powerful, underscored a broader truth, that progress often demands challenging outdated practices. The attendant's insistence began to waver as the atmosphere shifted. What had once been an isolated dispute was now drawing the attention of the cabin supervisor, who stepped forward with an air of reluctant authority. The supervisor, recognizing the mounting tension, attempted to mediate the situation by suggesting that the matter be deferred until landing. Yet Darius was not willing to allow this injustice to simply be swept aside. He reiterated his position, calmly pointing out that his credentials and booking information were indisputable. Every word he spoke resonated with the quiet strength of a leader who had dedicated his life to fighting discrimination. The conversation, now a focal point for everyone on board, quickly became more than a personal grievance. It was a powerful dialogue about equality, dignity, and the role of tradition in an ever-evolving society. The cabin, once filled with murmurs of dissent and confusion, gradually settled into an attentive silence, as if each passenger understood that they were witnessing a moment that transcended the ordinary. By the time the flight crew announced that the issue would be reviewed by the airline's management, the tension had reached a plateau. Darius's measured defiance had not only validated his right to the seat but had also sparked an unspoken call for reform. In that charged environment, the struggle over a simple seating assignment became emblematic of a much larger fight. A fight for respect, fairness, and the dismantling of biases that had long been tolerated. As the cabin slowly returned to a semblance of order, Darius remained seated, a quiet testament to the power of dignified resistance. His stance, unyielding in the face of adversity, left an indelible mark on everyone present, a reminder that even in the confined space of an airplane, the battle for justice can find a voice and inspire change. Just when it seemed that the dispute might settle with a quiet administrative review, an unexpected twist escalated the situation to a level that no one aboard the flight could have predicted. In a shocking display of underhanded tactics, Felicia Anders, whose claim to the seat had been the catalyst for the confrontation, was seen engaging in a discreet exchange with one of the cabin crew. Rumors quickly spread that a bribe was being offered, a monetary inducement designed to solidify her right to the disputed seat. As the transaction unfolded in hushed tones near the galley, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted dramatically. Darius Monroe, who had so far maintained his composure with a quiet dignity, could not ignore the implications of this covert deal. The idea that a bribe was being used to enforce discriminatory practices was not only illegal but deeply unethical. For him, it struck at the very heart of everything he had fought for throughout his illustrious career. Throughout the tense minutes that followed, passengers exchanged bewildered glances. Some were outraged by the blatant corruption, others were simply stunned by the unfolding drama. In a move that was both courageous and measured, Darius addressed the situation directly. "We are all entitled to our rights without resorting to backdoor dealings," he said quietly, his eyes scanning the cabin for allies among the dismayed travelers. His voice, steady and resolute, cut through the murmur of disbelief, leaving little doubt that he would not be bullied by illicit tactics. The cabin crew, now caught in the middle of a conflict far beyond the usual scope of in-flight service, looked uncertain. Their training did not prepare them for such overt displays of favoritism and corruption. Even the cabin supervisor, whose primary concern was to maintain order, seemed visibly shaken by the implications of the bribe. It was clear that what had begun as a dispute over a seat was rapidly evolving into a broader confrontation about fairness, transparency, and the abuse of authority. Felicia Anders, for her part, grew increasingly agitated as whispers of the bribe spread. Her face flushed with anger and frustration, and her attempts to assert her claim became more desperate. She insisted that the seat was rightfully hers, not just by custom, but because of the deal she had orchestrated. In doing so, she inadvertently revealed the cracks in her argument, exposing the fact that her claim was bolstered not by principle but by subterfuge. Meanwhile, Darius, undeterred by the escalating tension, doubled down on his stance. He began to document every detail of the encounter, recording the exchange, noting the positions of crew members, and carefully observing the reactions of his fellow passengers. His actions were not meant as retaliation but as a clear statement that such underhanded methods would not stand against the force of integrity and truth. He quietly resolved that this evidence would serve as the basis for a formal complaint to Skycrest Airlines, ensuring that the incident would not be swept under the rug. The discussion in the cabin grew heated, with passengers now openly debating the propriety of the exchange. Some sympathized with Darius's insistence on fairness, while others expressed confusion at the sudden eruption of bribery in what should have been a routine flight. Through it all, Darius remained the picture of calm, his quiet determination a stark contrast to the chaos around him. By the time the cabin crew finally called for a brief recess to sort out the matter, it was evident that the dispute had taken on a life of its own. The bribe had not only escalated the situation, it had transformed the incident into a pivotal moment in the fight against discrimination and corruption. Darius's commitment to exposing the truth, even in the confined quarters of an airplane, had resonated with many, setting the stage for what would soon become a landmark battle for justice. No sooner had the bribery scandal rocked the cabin than Felicia Anders, incensed by the setback, unleashed a new wave of retaliation that further inflamed tensions on board. Determined to maintain her hold over the disputed seat and bolster her fraudulent claim, she began issuing a series of baseless citations, allegations of violations ranging from improper use of in-flight amenities to supposed breaches of unspoken community rules. The cabin quickly became a stage for petty harassment. Felicia, with the full support of a few complicit crew members, distributed handwritten notices that detailed fines and warnings for behaviors that were, by any reasonable standard, entirely permissible. The notices cited arbitrary infractions, complaints about the brightness of reading lights, the volume of personal conversations, and even the arrangement of personal belongings in the first-class cabin. Each citation was a thinly veiled attempt to undermine Darius Monroe's right to the seat and to discredit his claims of entitlement. For Darius, this barrage of unfounded accusations was not merely an inconvenience, it was a deliberate strategy to erode his credibility. He had spent his career championing equality and transparency, and now he found himself under siege by an individual wielding false authority as a weapon. Despite the mounting onslaught, Darius maintained his composure. He meticulously documented each instance of harassment, collecting photographs of the citations and recording the names of crew members who participated in the distribution. His objective was clear: to compile an irrefutable record of misconduct that could be used to hold Felicia and her supporters accountable. Throughout the ordeal, the atmosphere in the cabin grew increasingly tense. Fellow passengers, who had already been witness to the earlier confrontations, now watched with a mix of disbelief and concern as the petty harassment unfolded. Conversations hushed, and many cast sympathetic glances at Darius, silently supporting his stand against this brazen abuse of power. Even as the false citations proliferated, Darius sought a constructive way to address the situation. He made several attempts to engage with the cabin crew in private, urging them to adhere to proper protocol and to treat every passenger fairly. Yet, his appeals were met with defensive responses from those who had become entangled in Felicia's scheme. The crew, caught between following orders and facing the mounting public outrage from passengers, struggled to navigate the complex web of conflicting directives. As the hours passed, it became clear that the incident was not confined to a mere seating dispute, it had ballooned into a full-scale battle over dignity and respect. Darius, despite the relentless onslaught of false citations and petty harassment, continued to stand firm. His calm and measured responses, documented evidence, and unwavering commitment to fairness began to sway the opinions of even the most skeptical onlookers. By the end of the flight, the cumulative effect of the harassment had created an environment that was both chaotic and deeply unsatisfactory. Darius's quiet determination, however, shone through the turmoil. His detailed record of the events would later serve as a cornerstone in his formal complaint to Skycrest Airlines, ensuring that the abuse would not be forgotten. For him, the struggle was not just about a single seat, it was a fight against a system that allowed bias and corruption to flourish unchecked. In the midst of this turbulent exchange, Darius resolved that he would continue to uphold the principles that had guided his career. The ordeal, while deeply distressing, only reinforced his commitment to justice and equality. As the flight prepared to land, the tension in the cabin began to subside, but the impact of the day's events lingered, a stark reminder that even in the most unexpected places, the battle for fairness is never truly over. The escalating conflict reached a dramatic climax when the situation took an even more hostile turn. As the in-flight altercations grew louder and more contentious, the cabin supervisor, now identified as Supervisor Nolan, stepped in. With a tone that brooked no further discussion, Nolan demanded that Darius Monroe vacate his first-class seat to make way for Felicia Anders, who had been backed by a faction of complicit crew members and unruly passengers. Despite the mounting pressure, Darius maintained his unyielding stance. With quiet but firm resolve, he reiterated his right to the seat based on his ticket and elite platinum status, refusing to be coerced by arbitrary demands. As the argument intensified, the flight's atmosphere shifted from one of simmering tension to outright confrontation. Passengers who had initially been on the sidelines now found themselves involuntarily drawn into the dispute, their murmurs and side comments amplifying the drama unfolding at 30,000 feet. At this point, the matter took on a legalistic tone when the captain of the flight intervened. In a stern announcement over the intercom, the captain warned that if Darius did not comply with the crew's demands, he would be subject to removal from the aircraft. The captain's threat was clear: the airline's policy, regardless of the underlying injustice, would be enforced with uncompromising rigidity. Faced with the prospect of security intervening, Darius remained calm. He continued to assert his rights, his voice steady as he explained that the accusations levied against him were baseless and that his credentials as a respected leader and former lawman were beyond dispute. Despite his measured protests, the situation spiraled further when security personnel were called to the scene. In a scene that felt both surreal and deeply unjust, Darius was escorted off the plane under the watchful eyes of uniformed guards. Even as he was led away, he sent a series of discreet text messages to his chief operating officer back at Innovatech Solutions, informing him that the incident was no mere misunderstanding, it was a deliberate act of discrimination. His messages were concise, filled with the calm urgency of a man who had faced adversity before and knew that the truth would ultimately prevail. The removal of Darius from the aircraft was met with a mixture of shock and quiet support from the remaining passengers. Many who had witnessed the confrontation recognized the injustice of the situation and expressed sympathy for his plight. For Darius, the forced removal was a bitter pill to swallow, but it only served to reinforce his resolve. As he stepped away from the plane and into the brisk airport air, he vowed that he would pursue every available avenue to hold Skycrest Airlines accountable for the treatment he had received. In the ensuing hours, the incident rapidly spread through social media and local news channels, igniting a firestorm of debate over discrimination, airline policy, and the abuse of authority. Darius's dignified resistance had become a symbol, a rallying cry for those who believe that no one, regardless of their status or past service, should be subjected to such arbitrary and prejudiced treatment. Even as security details escorted him to a waiting vehicle, Darius's mind was already turning to the next steps. He meticulously reviewed his documentation, aware that his detailed records of the incident would form the backbone of a formal complaint and potential legal action. The forced removal, while painful, was just another chapter in a larger struggle for justice, a struggle that would continue long after the flight had landed. News of the incident involving Darius Monroe's forced removal spread like wildfire. Within minutes, social media platforms were ablaze with reactions. Many expressing outrage, others sharing messages of support for the dignified CEO. The incident, which had begun as a dispute over a seat, had now caught the attention of national news outlets and advocacy groups determined to combat discrimination. At the airport, as Darius sat quietly in a waiting lounge, reporters swarmed with questions. His calm, measured responses only served to underscore the injustice of what had occurred aboard the flight. Passengers who had witnessed the confrontation recounted their experiences, further painting a picture of an incident that was as troubling as it was emblematic of broader systemic issues. Meanwhile, Skycrest Airlines' upper management was forced to confront the fallout. The CEO of Skycrest Airlines, shocked by the unfolding scandal, launched an internal investigation. Early reports suggested that discriminatory practices had been embedded in the airline's protocols, and the incident quickly became a lightning rod for calls for sweeping changes. For Darius, the national spotlight was a double-edged sword. While it shone a harsh light on the airline's failings, it also provided an opportunity to rally public support and push for reforms that would prevent such incidents from happening again. The media's focus on Darius's dignified behavior and the blatant injustice he had endured catalyzed discussions about the need for comprehensive diversity training and policy overhauls across the industry. Advocates for civil rights praised his resilience, noting that his calm defiance had not only preserved his own dignity but had ignited a broader conversation about equality in public service. As the day progressed, Darius continued to field interviews with national outlets, his measured tone and clear-eyed account of the events resonating with viewers across the country. Even as critics of the airline scrambled to justify the crew's actions, public sentiment increasingly sided with Darius, a sentiment that would come to play a crucial role in the subsequent actions taken by regulatory bodies and consumer advocacy groups. In the days following the incident, the public outcry grew louder. Darius Monroe's experience had become a catalyst for change, not just for Skycrest Airlines but for the entire aviation industry. Community leaders, civil rights groups, and ordinary citizens alike united in their demand for accountability and reform. Public forums and social media campaigns erupted with calls to ban discriminatory practices from all facets of air travel. Darius's story was recounted repeatedly as a powerful example of resilience in the face of blatant bias. Local news outlets and national networks covered the story extensively, highlighting the broader implications of allowing outdated customs to dictate modern practices. Pressure mounted on Skycrest Airlines to not only address the incident but to implement meaningful changes. Within a short period, the airline announced that it would launch a comprehensive review of its seating policies and diversity training programs. New guidelines were promised to ensure that no passenger, regardless of their background, would ever again face similar mistreatment. The public support for Darius was evident in the countless messages of solidarity that flooded social media. Passengers shared their own experiences of subtle discrimination, and advocacy groups rallied to demand transparency from the airline industry. Through it all, Darius continued to speak out, using his platform to call for justice and equality. His steady, composed demeanor throughout the ordeal had become a symbol of the change that was needed. In town halls and community gatherings, discussions centered on the need for regulatory oversight and the implementation of fair practices across the board. The incident, once a solitary dispute aboard a flight, had transformed into a nationwide movement. The backlash against the airline's policies not only prompted internal reforms at Skycrest Airlines but also sparked legislative debates about anti-discrimination measures in air travel. In many ways, the public outcry served as a turning point, a moment when the collective voice of the people forced an institution to reckon with its past and commit to a more equitable future. Darius's experience, documented in every detail and amplified by a media hungry for accountability, had become a rallying cry for change. It was a vivid reminder that even a single act of discrimination could no longer be tolerated in a society that valued justice and equality. As the dust settled from the national uproar, the final chapter of this turbulent saga began to take shape. The intense media scrutiny, public outcry, and mounting pressure from advocacy groups forced SkyCrest Airlines to confront the full extent of its failures. The company's board convened emergency meetings, and in a series of dramatic announcements, the airline vowed to implement sweeping changes to its policies and training programs. In the weeks that followed, the CEO of SkyCrest Airlines released a public statement expressing deep regret over the incident involving Darius Monroe and pledging to overhaul company practices to ensure fairness and inclusivity. A comprehensive diversity training program was launched for all staff, and an independent oversight committee was established to monitor compliance with the new policies. These measures were designed not only to address the incident but also to prevent any future occurrence of discrimination. For Darius, the final reckoning was bittersweet. Though he had been forced off the plane and subjected to humiliating treatment, his dignified resistance had sparked meaningful change. The aftermath of the incident brought about a transformation in both the corporate culture of SkyCrest Airlines and the broader conversation around discrimination in public life. Former employees and industry insiders began to reflect on their own biases, and many spoke openly about the need for systemic reform. In a final twist to the unfolding narrative, reports surfaced that several high-ranking officials at SkyCrest Airlines were stepping down in the wake of the scandal. The fallout extended well beyond a single flight, triggering a comprehensive review of industry practices across the board. For many in the public, this was seen as a necessary cleansing. A decisive move toward ensuring that no one would ever again be subjected to arbitrary and discriminatory treatment. As the changes took root, Darius Monroe quietly returned to his life and work, resolute in his belief that dignity and respect should prevail. Though the ordeal had been deeply personal, its legacy was far-reaching. It served as a potent reminder that standing up for one's rights can indeed catalyze positive transformation, even in the face of systemic injustice. In the final analysis, the incident aboard the SkyCrest Airlines flight became a defining moment, a clarion call for reform that resonated nationwide. The journey from that fateful call to the sweeping changes that followed was a testament to the enduring power of truth and perseverance. And as the airline industry began its slow march toward a more inclusive future, the story of Darius Monroe remained etched in the collective memory as a beacon of hope, courage, and the relentless pursuit of justice.